Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents 40 Fabulous and Fae by Melinda Chase, narrated by Traci Odom. Chapter 1. "Take the stupid shoes!" I screeched, while simultaneously launching my hardly worn pair of Louboutins straight at my husband's head. Ex-husband. I needed to start remembering that tiny yet very significant detail. To my absolute horror, Kenneth managed to duck, and narrowly avoided getting stabbed in the eye with the very sharp, stupidly irresponsible, and impossible-to-wear heel. If only I had learned to throw when I was a child, maybe that moment would have turned out differently. But I guess I should back up a little bit. My name is Shannon McCarthy, a boring name for a boring woman. And even more boring, here I am, barely 40, the victim of a male midlife crisis, newly divorced and forced to move back home to Portland, Oregon. Well, not forced, but right now Portland seemed like a much better choice than Boston, where news of my husband's affair still littered the front pages of our local newspaper. Who would have thought my life would turn out like this? Not me, that's for damn sure. When I married Kenneth, with his smooth, tan skin and devilish good looks, I really thought that was it for me. This was the guy I'd spend the rest of my life with. We'd have 2 very high-profile careers, me as a DA and him as a judge, live in a big fancy house with a purebred golden retriever who listened to our every single command, and drive shiny new sports cars, like a Lamborghini, to and from our high-paying jobs every day. It was the life every single Boston girl dreams of. And apparently it was a life I no longer got to have. Not since Kenneth decided his pretty young clerk was the place he should stick his junk, instead of being a respectable man and coming home to his wife. So here we are. I was in the middle of packing up the home we'd bought 10 years ago, the one we were supposed to grow old in, while Kenneth sat on his butt and complained about every single thing I tried to box up. Anything he had bought me during the 15 years we'd been married was apparently just a reminder of how much he had given me over the years. As if I hadn't given him anything, too. I was the one who'd worked my tiny little butt off to put him through law school when I was on a public defender's salary, saving and pinching every penny I possibly could so that we didn't go hungry while he attended Northeastern. "I should have sent you to Suffolk," I growled at him. "At least then I wouldn't have wasted $100 grand so you could be a corrupt judge." "I am not a corrupt judge," Kenneth hollered. "What part of this don't you get?" "All of it," I shrieked. "How could you throw away 15 years of marriage for a fling? 15 years, Kenneth. We were building a life together. We were supposed to have—" "Have what, Shannon?" he demanded, stepping up into my personal space. Those deep brown eyes of his bore into my green ones with a fury I'd only seen him use on the worst criminals, the ones he absolutely loathed and could never be impartial to. I guess I fell into that category now. The category of people Kenneth loathes. "Have it," I sputtered as I attempted to articulate just what it was. But I couldn't find the words. It was huge. It encompassed so much that I couldn't possibly do it justice with a few shouted sentences. "Yeah," Kenneth sneered. "It being the fancy house, the nice car, the dog." Kenneth pointed an accusatory finger at Marley, our mud. We weren't exactly able to spring for the golden retriever 6 years before. "What's wrong with that?" I demanded. "I wanted a nice life, a comfortable one. I wanted to be happy in my marriage, unlike every other woman in my family. Is that too much to ask?" Kenneth stopped. A brief flash of humanity leaped into his eyes, but then it was gone just as quickly. I almost wasn't sure if it had actually been there in the first place. "Maybe it is," he finally whispered, his eyes downcast. "Because by asking for it, you tried to mold me into something I'm not, something I could never be for you." "All I asked was for you to love me," I murmured. Tears pricked my eyes, and I felt the brick wall I'd so carefully built in the last 2 weeks start to crumble and fall. "No," you didn't." He shook his head and adjusted his navy blue tie. "You asked me to be this monument of a husband, like I was some character in a storybook. This isn't a story, Shan." "It's our story," I insisted. I stepped up to him and cupped his soft, warm cheeks in my hands the way I always used to, begging him to look up at me, to love me. But he didn't. Kenneth leaned into my touch one last time before he shoved my hands off of him and stepped back, teary-eyed. "It's your story," he replied. "I have to go live my own story, and you're just not in it. I'm sorry. Really." And I could see that he was. He thought that his apology was enough to make me forget that after 15 years he'd come home one night and just asked me for a divorce. Just like that. No nonsense, no lead-in. Kenneth started to walk down the giant carpeted staircase, making a beeline for the door. I did my best to force myself to stay put. I couldn't watch him leave this time. But my feet had other plans. Before I knew it, I was out of our enormous master bedroom and pressed up against the railing of our second-floor landing. "Ken?" I called out, right as his hand went to open our massive oak front door. He froze, hand in the air, and didn't turn back to me. "What?" "Why her?" I couldn't help it. I needed to know what was so much better about this other woman, what made her worthy of breaking up a marriage. Kenneth sucked in a huge breath and then sighed. He didn't turn to look back at me when he spoke. I wasn't sure if it was because he couldn't bear to see the look on my face or if he didn't want me to see the look on his. "She and I want to live the same story, Shannon." With that, the door slammed shut with a sound of such finality, I swear it could have happened in a Hitchcock movie. The scream that ripped from my throat was so feral and animalistic it almost sounded like a banshee. Not that I believed in those sorts of things. When all of the sound had made its way out of me, and my vocal cords had been just about rubbed dry, I slowly turned back to the bedroom, where I had about 15 boxes full of clothes to seal and pack. Except they were all done. Every single box that I had packed up was closed and sealed nicely with 2 layers of tape, as if some invisible assistant had come along and finished the task for me in mere moments. For a second, my heart stopped, and my heavy panting caught in my throat. "You're imagining things, Shannon," I muttered to myself. "You must have closed those boxes already." But how could I? The last thing I remember doing was yanking a Louboutin out of an open box to throw at Kenneth. Even the box of shoes, though, was closed and sealed. Freaked out, I headed down to the kitchen to finish packing. The movers would be coming in the morning, and I'd be on a flight home the next afternoon. Home. I hadn't been there for more than a brief 2-day visit in nearly 10 years. It wasn't that I didn't love my mom and my Grams, or Gram's best friend Dina. I loved them more than words could say. It was their beliefs I didn't love. All 3 of them were impossibly superstitious, and whenever I was around, I always felt like there was some big secret I was missing out on, some sort of major thing I just didn't know. Which was crazy. They were my family, and I knew everything there was to know about them all. But still, my intuition always went haywire whenever I was at that house, the same one Mom had grown up in after her father had abandoned them, the same one I'd grown up in. Less than 24 hours after my final fight with Kenneth, I was in an Uber and on my way to the airport, and stuck in traffic. "Are you sure there's no back roads you can take to get us there faster?" I asked the driver, a stout young man with fire-engine red hair, the same color as mine. He had a South Boston accent and drove with his golfing hat on backwards. "No, lady, sorry," the guy shrugged. "Traffic's real bad out today, huh?" "Sure is," I sighed, and looked at my watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. I had half an hour before the gates closed. I missed my flight, and I was stuck in Boston for who knew how long. I just needed to get out, to go home and see my family and make some sort of attempt to reconnect with life itself, Figure out my next act. Without Kenneth. The traffic didn't improve, even by a smidgen. I was late to the airport, and by the time I made it through security, I was sweaty and anxious as I sprinted through the terminal. Just as I got up to the gate, I saw those big white doors start to close. "No, wait!" I screamed, so loudly I turned a plethora of heads. The attendant either didn't hear me or didn't care, because those doors closed all the same. "I have a ticket for this flight," I gasped at the cranky old flight attendant manning the door. "I need to get on." She looked up, appraised me with dark hazel eyes, and then shook her head with absolutely no remorse. "Sorry," she shrugged. "Can't help you. Get here earlier next time, like everyone else." "No, look, you don't understand," I wailed. I could already feel it all coming down on top of me, revving up for a massive breakdown. The cheating, the divorce, the move, the pre-midlife crisis I was about to have. "I'm getting a divorce, okay? Because my cheating ex-husband has some grand idea that he's going to go live a story, whatever that means. But he's not just living a story. Oh, no, he is living it with someone else. The man cheated on me and then had the gall to blame it on this insane need to live my own story. What does that even mean? Do you know? Because I don't. I just don't. So anyways, now I'm here, trying to get on this flight to go home and see my mom and my Grams, who I haven't seen since Christmas, mind you. I'm a terrible daughter, I know, save it. My ex used to tell me that all the time. He also said I was a terrible spouse, but he's the one who cheated. So you tell me who got the last word there, okay? All I'm really saying is that I need, and I mean need, to get on this flight and get the hell out of this city before the whole thing falls down and suffocates me. So is that too much to ask, for you to open those doors and let me get on my flight so I don't suffocate?" Yeah. It wasn't until after I'd finished and felt that sort of out-of-breath panic a person feels after they've acted like a total idiot that I realized I'd pretty much just dumped my entire life story on a total stranger. And an entire airport terminal. The stewardess, though, looked wholly unimpressed and unamused with my story. She just shook her head and sighed. "Go back to customer service and they'll get you on the next flight," she informed me. "Have a good day." She glanced back down at whatever stupid paper was on her desk, and that was when I lost it. "Listen to me," I hissed, crouching down so I could meet her eyes head on. "You need to let me on that flight. Now." All of a sudden, the woman's hazel eyes went blank, kind of like a person's does in an overacted TV scene where they're supposed to be hypnotized. She stared at me, and this scary smile twitched the corner of her lips, but didn't go all the way, and sure as hell didn't meet her eyes. "Okay, you can get on this flight," she said robotically, and then went to open the doors as if she was a puppet on a string. I didn't even have the time to question the strange oddity. I just nodded my thanks and rushed past her to get on that plane. Chapter 2. The flight was long, mostly because I hated flying. Of course, one time I'd gone all the way from Boston to Australia and made it out alive. I hadn't been too sure I'd step foot in Sydney, though. Since the flight was so full of turbulence, all I could do was replay the opening scene of Lost over and over and over in my mind. I think it's safe to say I'm a bit of a wimp when it comes to planes. But hey, a girl's allowed to have one fear, right? And since there was absolutely nothing else in the world that could possibly scare me, I allowed myself to panic whenever my plane hit a little pocket of air and shook like we were in the middle of freaking Pompeii. I was still the first one to step off that flight, though. I pretty much rushed right to the front the moment we were allowed to unbuckle our seatbelts, carry-on in hand. The flight attendants tried to tell me to sit back down, but once again they seemed to listen to me. Who knew all it took to get your way was a bit of eye contact and some desperation fueled by an emotional breakdown? My sudden powers of persuasion were notable, but I didn't have the energy or time to decipher why, because the plane had rolled up to the gate at that point, and I really wanted off. And I needed to pee. Airplane bathrooms were not my favorite place in the world. I dashed off the plane, went to the restroom, and then headed toward the parking lot, where my mom was supposed to meet me. as long as she wasn't late, which was, to be completely honest, an absolute rarity. Sometimes I wondered if I was secretly adopted, since I had this insatiable need to be everywhere at least 5 minutes early. Had it not been for the classic McCarthy red hair and green eyes, I would have already tried to search out some long-lost birth parents. See, the thing is, I'm nothing like Mom or Grams. In fact, I'm just about as opposite from them as a girl could possibly get. Whereas the women in my family tended to be a bit frazzled, always late, and sometimes forgot their heads were on their shoulders, I was a type A, completely neurotic perfectionist. We butted heads a lot growing up. We butted heads even more when I went off to law school with grand ideas of helping people and making a lot of money. Grams and Mom see very little value in money. They would have preferred I'd stayed home, gone to the University of Oregon, and helped them run their tiny little occult shop on 4th Street. But I'd wanted no part in that. Magic doesn't exist, and I sure as hell didn't want to peddle falsities to the poor tourists. Mom and Grams didn't see it that way, of course. In their minds, crystals and herbs were full of mystical energy and all sorts of magical elements. But our deviant beliefs weren't even the worst of it. No, that came when I met Kenneth. The thing is, Mom and Grams believed there was some sort of curse on our family. The men never stuck around, or they were absolutely worthless, or they died. And admittedly, when I looked at our family history as it pertained to love and marriage, we didn't have the best track record. Grams grew up with her mom, aunt, and cousin, all women, no men. Grams' dad had run out on them while her uncle had been killed. Even her aunt's son had disappeared mysteriously. And when she'd come to Portland, something similar had happened to her. I wasn't too clear on the details, though. The guy may have run out or been killed or, well, never existed for all I knew. And then there was the story of my own father, a flighty hippie who would have rather smoked pot all day than raised a baby. Now the same thing had happened to Kenneth and me. So, taking all of that into consideration, it almost did seem like we were cursed. But I'd never let them know I was starting to believe it. Just a little bit. Especially after the blowout that happened when Kenneth and I had gotten married. They'd told me he wouldn't stick around, and I'd in turn said some equally unpleasant things. But now there I was, walking into the bright sunshine of a summer's day in Portland, single and heartbroken, just as they'd said I would be. I shook myself away from those thoughts and instead turned to search for my mom. It was no use anticipating what she might say before she'd even said it. No, it was better to just wait and see. To my surprise, I spotted her in the 20-minute pickup zone, leaning against the hood of her bright red 1994 Mustang convertible, shades over her eyes and bright red lipstick on her full lips. Classic Mom. She looked up as I approached, and her red curls glinted in the sunlight. I noticed a few streaks of gray in them that I hadn't seen before, and realized with a start that my mom was getting older. I was 40, after all. The woman was already 65, though she didn't look a day over 50. People tended to mistake us for sisters constantly. "Hi, Mom," I greeted her as I mentally prepared myself for the avalanche of jabs at my broken marriage. "Is that my baby girl?" my mom gasped playfully. She ripped her shades from her eyes and scrutinized me as if I was a piece of art in some big, famous museum. "Look at you, Miss Shannon McCarthy." Jab number 1, regressing to my maiden name already. "I see we've lost the Mrs. title already," I joked. "Baby, the man divorced you." She rolled her eyes and pulled a face at the thought of Kenneth. "Drop the MRS degree and get your ass back on the streets. Hell, if I still looked like you, that's where I'd be right now." "You look exactly like me," I laughed. We were now face to face with each other, and my mom stopped to give me a real once-over, the kind only a mother can give. "How you doing?" she asked softly, reaching out a hand to stroke my cheek. The torrent of tears I'd been barely holding in for the last few weeks threatened to wash over me right then. There's something about a mother's touch that manages to bring out all of the suppressed emotions a girl would rather hide. "Fine," I whispered, but we both knew it was a lie. "Well, "Let's get home and see if we can improve upon fine," she announced, grabbing my carry-on and tossing it carelessly into the back of her convertible. "Your Grams made chicken and dumplings just for you." "Grams cooked for me?" I asked in astonishment. I truly couldn't remember the last time the woman had made a meal that didn't come from a box. Grams could do it, no doubt, but she always said cooking felt like a waste of time when there was ready-made food for sale in the supermarkets. "Don't look so surprised when you walk in, kid," Mom instructed as she peeled away from the parking space and started to race down the street at top speed. That was how she always drove, and she'd never once gotten a ticket for it. My mom could talk her way out of any situation, even speeding tickets. She's really proud of this meal, for whatever reason. Grams never cooked me food when I was heartbroken. "Well, did you ever go through a divorce?" I shot back. Elle McCarthy glanced at me out of the corner of her eyes like she wanted to say something, but then shut her mouth and turned back to look at the road. That was weird. My mom never kept her mouth shut about anything. Hell, I knew every time she had a UTI. And Grams had cooked. I wasn't sure why, but a weird feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. Something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. We pulled up to the quaint little cottage on the outskirts of Portland, and the jewel-green doors swung wide open to reveal Adora McCarthy in all of her glory. Her red hair had gone blonde and white with old age, and her porcelain skin sagged a bit at her neck and chin. Her green eyes sparkled with the same youthful joy they had for as long as I could remember. For a 90-year-old woman, she acted like she was still in her 60s. I had some darn good genes. "My granddaughter is home," Grams sang in her thick southern drawl as I sprang from the car and dashed up to hug her. "It's a pity you had to come home because of that horrid man, but I'm still glad you're back." "I missed you," I murmured into her hair. It smelled of lavender and patchouli oil, a scent combination that was uniquely Grams. "Well, you should have come back to visit more often," she exclaimed, swatting me softly on the shoulder. "Mama, she couldn't, remember?" my mom replied as she marched through the door with my bag. "She was a big-time DA in the city." "Right, of course," Grams nodded seriously. "It's much more important than helping us run our little shop." There it was, jab number 2. There would be plenty more where that came from. "Don't think about it like that," I chided her, stepping into the house myself. "Besides, all of that's in the past now." I sucked in a deep breath, smelling the sage and herbs that I had grown up with. Crystals and occult trinkets littered the mantel in the living room, while charms to ward off fae and other demons hung over every doorway. The place looked like an eclectic mess. But it was the eclectic mess I'd grown up with. Even though I didn't believe in any of it, I still felt comforted by all of it, the way I had as a child. The charms and crystals and trinkets made me feel safe. "Shannon, get your behind in this kitchen," Grams called out. "The big city DA needs a home-cooked meal." "Coming," I called out. I just turned to the kitchen when I heard a familiar meow behind me. I turned to see Graham's old cat Herman as he approached me, in the mood for our usual single-pet greeting. "Hey, buddy," I murmured as I bent down. For the first time in my entire adult life, I suddenly realized just how strange it was that Herman was even alive. That might sound absolutely horrible, but the cat had been around for as long as I had been around, longer even, since Grams had him before I was born. I mean, the cat had to be at least 40. I'd never heard of a cat living that long in my entire life. As if Herman could hear my inner musings, he reached up and swatted my knee with his sharp claws. "Ouch!" I hissed at him, instantly taking my hand back. "No pets for you if you're going to act like that." "Meow," Herman replied before he stalked off with his tail held high. "How the hell are you still alive?" I murmured when I watched him go. I'd already seen too many strange things within the last day to give this seemingly immortal cat any more thought. So instead, I tried to shove the oddities out of my mind and turned back to the kitchen, where the aroma of freshly made chicken and dumplings filled my nostrils. Chapter 3. It took me less than a day to confirm that Mom and Grams were, in fact, acting extremely strangely. They made no more comments on my failed marriage. They didn't try to tell me that men were useless or that marriage was a made-up institution meant to keep women down and allow the patriarchy to flourish, or even make a not-so-subtle hint that I'd picked a job that was far too demanding. They were walking on eggshells because I was getting a divorce. Maybe they felt guilty that, after all of these years wishing Kenneth would step out of our lives, he finally was. I was in my childhood bedroom, complete with drawings of fairies and a pink canopy bed on my second morning in Portland when my mom knocked on the door. As she had when I was a teenager, Mom knocked once and then proceeded to just open the door, without even waiting for me to tell her to come in. "Please, do enter," I said sarcastically. "Privacy. Sorry." Mom put up her hands and then stepped back out into the hall dramatically. She closed the door and knocked again, but this time she waited and didn't come in straight away. I should have been used to her antics after dealing with them for 40 years, but they still never ceased to make me laugh. "You may come in," I called out in my most posh voice. "Why, thank you for allowing me entrance to your humble abode," Mom replied, in an equally posh voice as she entered. "You are quite welcome," I laughed. "What's up?" "I was just wondering if you wanted to come down to the shop with us this morning," she replied. "It's a full moon, so we're expecting a bit of a rush. We could really use your help. I'll even pay you. You do need a job after all." "Mom, I don't really think being a cashier is on my list of desirable jobs," I chuckled. I glanced down at the laptop in front of me, where I was searching for any and all law-related jobs in Portland, and sighed. I'd much rather be in the shop with you and Grams than going over this. "What is it?" she asked curiously. "Just a bunch of nothing," I replied. "I'm hoping some law firm needs a replacement, or one of the neighboring counties might need a criminal prosecutor." "That stuff is just too awful," Mom sighed. "I don't know how you do it." "Neither do I murmured, more to myself than anyone else. Sometimes seeing criminals day in and day out really did get to me. But of course my mom's eyes immediately lit up as she latched onto my words. "Do you think you might want to quit? Find another line of work?" she asked hopefully. I was about to say no, of course not, but something stopped me. "Maybe," I sighed. "I just don't know what I'm doing anymore. At all." We sat in silence for a moment. For the first time in her life, Elle McCarthy was speechless. Not that I could blame her. I'd always had a plan for my life, up until now. Now I felt as if I was just floating through time and space, held down by nothing more than a loosely tied string that could fall away at any moment. "Come to the shop," Mom ordered, patting my leg. "A little bit of magic makes everything better." As was tradition, I rolled my eyes at that statement, but I couldn't help thinking that maybe I was in need of a little magic at the moment. My mom hadn't lied. The shop was busy. With the boom of millennial spiritualism and all those crazy people who believed in woo in the last 10 or so years, business was better than ever. And since Mom and Grams had a reputation among the Portland lay people for being the go-to women on anything pagan, mystical, or magical, they had cornered the market long before those new capitalist fake shops could. Not that I thought anything they sold was real. They just didn't fake it, since the two of them believed in it all so hard. They'd even named the shop Magic for Real. I spent the day reverting to my teenage self. But where I used to pack bags for cat ladies and strangely quiet people, I was now packing bags for young dudes in beanies and 30-year-old moms with dyed blonde hair and vegan kale smoothies in hand. The crowd of customers had changed, but the shop sure hadn't. There were still hand-tied sage bundles near the register, potions along the shelves, and altars for sale in the back. "Having fun?" Grams asked halfway through the day, when I just finished stuffing a bag full of crystals and
Sample complete. Ready to continue?